And you argue, quote, the welfare state reduces the incentives to develop human capital, and receiving the products of other people's human capital, that is getting money from the rich if you're poor, is by no means as fundamental as developing one's own human capital, close quote. What is human capital, and why does the welfare state suppress the incentives to develop it?
Well, human capital is the ability to create the material things that constitute wealth. People have been puzzled by the fact for a long time that after a major war with huge destruction, once peace is restored, the economy gets restored often in a very few years. I think Western Europe after World War II, everything that was there was bombed, and they wondered why. How can that be? And John Stuart Mill explained this back in the middle of the 19th century, that the material things are going to be used up and wear out, whether there's a war or not. And so it's really the ability to reproduce, to operate those things, to maintain them, and then reproduce them was necessary. That's the real wealth. And so when you destroy the physical wealth, you really haven't done as much as if you destroyed the human capital. A classic example, in the 1970s, Uganda decided that the Gujaratis from India were just too wealthy and controlled too much of the economy. And they sent them out and they wouldn't let them take their wealth with them. And so the Gujaratis arrived, mostly in England, destitute. And the Ugandan government has taken over all this material stuff. Over a period of a relatively few years, the Gujaratis were prosperous in England, and the Ugandan economy collapsed because they didn't have people who could do what the Gujaratis were doing, and so they no longer had the same production. It's also one of the problems with trying to finance things by confiscating the wealth of the wealthy. All you can confiscate is the material wealth. You cannot confiscate the human capital.
So the true wealth, the enduring wealth, the wealth that leads to wealth in the material world is between people's ears.
Absolutely.
And why does the welfare state suppress incentives for poor people to develop their human capital?
Of course, you can live off what other people have produced. And it's not just the welfare state. It's true among nations. Spain, for example, during its heyday in the 16th, 17th century, it received gold and silver literally by the ton, something like 200 tons of gold. If you can imagine, gold is normally measured in ounces. So they get 200 tons of it from the Western Hemisphere colonies. They get, I think, some 1,800 or something, 1,000 ounces of silver. And so Spain didn't have to develop its human capital, and it didn't. It bought whatever it wanted because it had all of this. But when all of that money was spent, and the colonies broke free and so on, Spain had nothing. And so Spain is today one of the poorest countries in Western Europe.
And that's just what the Saudis are afraid of right now.
And that's happening in Saudi Arabia. It's already happening in Saudi Arabia. Here, nature has given out to Saudi Arabia all this wealth. Great. The elite don't have to work. They live in have fabulous wealth. The ordinary Saudi doesn't have to do very much because the government subsidizes his housing, it subsidizes all kinds of things. And so over half the people in Saudi Arabia are foreigners who are in the Saudi workforce. And so they don't have to develop any human capital. If you go back some centuries earlier, when the Middle East was really one of the most advanced parts of the world, they hadn't yet discovered uses for petroleum. And so they had to work for everything, and they worked for it, and that was
the period where we get the great scholarship.
That's right. That's right.